Ron Strauss flew Elvis Presley home for the last time on a clear August afternoon in 1977, and he didn't know it. Nobody did. The Lisa Marie touched down at Memphis International with its engines winding to silence, and a quiet man walked down the stairs, got into a waiting car, and drove away without looking back. 2 days later, the world stopped. That last flight haunts Strauss still, not because anything went wrong in the cockpit, not because the weather turned or the instruments failed or some emergency scrambled the crew. Everything went exactly right. The landing was textbook, the fuel consumption was logged. What haunts him is the silence that filled the cabin for those 2 hours above America, and the figure sitting motionless at the window, watching the ground below as if he were already saying goodbye to it. This is the account of the man who held Elvis Presley's life in his hands every time they left the runway, the pilot who saw what the concert photographs never captured, and who carried the truth of those final days long after the rest of the world had buried it under mythology. The story of the Lisa Marie begins in 1975, when Elvis took delivery of a Convair 880 jet that had previously carried Delta Airlines passengers across the country. After a $1 million customization that Elvis oversaw personally, the aircraft emerged as something the aviation world had never quite seen before. Gold-plated seatbelt buckles caught the light in the main cabin, where leather seating had been arranged like a living room rather than any conventional aircraft interior. A conference room featured a custom-built table for contracts, card games, or simply spreading out and breathing. Further back, a bedroom suite offered a queen-sized bed fitted with its own seatbelt system. Bathroom fixtures trimmed in gold, a sound system running throughout every compartment. Every detail chosen by Elvis himself, not for show but for the specific purpose of comfort in the one space he actually controlled. The name painted along the fuselage in elegant script was Lisa Marie, after his only daughter, and that choice alone said everything about what the aircraft meant to him. This was not a status symbol purchased to impress. It was a sanctuary built around a specific longing, the desire to be a father and a man rather than a monument. Captain Ron Strauss came to the position through professional channels, hired for his flight hours and his reputation for keeping his mouth shut. His background was straightforward, thousands of hours logged, a record without incident. The kind of pilot who treats every pre-flight inspection the same whether the passenger is a corporate executive or the most famous entertainer alive. The job, as he understood it at the start, was transportation. Get the client from one place to another safely, maintain the aircraft, and stay on the crew side of the invisible line that separates professionals from the inner circle. That line dissolved gradually, without a clear moment when the shift happened. Elvis treated his flight crew with a directness and warmth that bypassed the usual employer-employee performance. He asked about their families. He remembered what they told him. He expressed genuine gratitude for a smooth flight through bad weather, rather than treating exceptional skill as simply something owed to him. Over months and then years, Strauss found himself carrying a knowledge of this man that no interview, no biography, no documentary would ever fully reach, the knowledge that comes from watching someone be themselves when the cameras are gone and the crowd noise has faded. What he witnessed was a performer at a genuinely difficult crossroads. The Las Vegas residencies continued to sell out through the mid-1970s, and the tours moved audiences who had waited years to see the legend in person. But the voice that had once carried effortlessly now demanded real effort to sustain. The physical presence that had scandalized American television in the 1950s had given way to a man managing weight gain, escalating health problems, and a pharmaceutical regimen that had grown complex enough to require its own vocabulary. The marriage to Priscilla had ended. Colonel Parker's management contract held Elvis in arrangements that left him little room to maneuver. Graceland, which had once been the concrete proof of how far he'd traveled from Tupelo, Mississippi, had become something closer to a beautiful trap. The Lisa Marie offered a specific relief from all of that. When Elvis boarded the aircraft, he was making an active choice. one of the few that remained genuinely his. Colonel Parker couldn't reach him at altitude. Fans couldn't press against him through the oval windows. The plane functioned as a decompression chamber, a space where the pressure of being Elvis Presley could drop to something survivable for a few hours. Strauss and his crew kept the cabin comfortable, the flight smooth, and the atmosphere free of demands, giving Elvis the rare gift of existing without performing. The flight logs accumulated over those years read like a relentless itinerary. February would show 6 flights between Memphis and various cities. March brought 11 flights across the Midwest. April logged 9 more crisscrossing the South. The sheer volume of movement told a story the concert posters couldn't. A man in perpetual transit, never quite arriving at whatever it was he was looking for. By 1977, the contrast between the public version of Elvis and the man who boarded the Lisa Marie had widened into something difficult to witness. The jumpsuits grew more elaborate, encrusted with additional stones and metalwork, as if the costumes could compensate through sheer visual impact for the energy quietly draining away from the person inside them. On stage, something still ignited, but backstage, in the limousines, and especially on the aircraft, the exhaustion showed in ways that stage lighting could never conceal. Strauss noticed the slowing gait, the pause at the top of the aircraft stairs to catch breath, the puffiness that settled into Elvis's face during those months. The bedroom suite at the back of the Lisa Marie saw increasing use on flights that earlier would have been social occasions filled with card games and conversation. The door would close with a soft click and the cabin would go quiet, just engine hum and the occasional creak of the airframe. Strauss learned not to disturb these retreats. The rest was doing something that nothing else could. The prescription bottles that appeared on cabin surfaces spoke their own language. Demerol, Dilaudid, Percodan, names the crew recognized without medical training, names that told a story nobody on board had the authority or courage to address. The Memphis Mafia, that rotating group of friends and employees surrounding Elvis, seemed caught in the same paralysis, everyone seeing clearly what was happening and nobody knowing how to intervene without losing their place in his shrinking world. The financial architecture of Elvis's life made stopping impossible anyway. Graceland's operating costs, the payroll covering dozens of employees, the lifestyle that consumed everything he earned and then some, all of it required the tour machine to keep turning. Colonel Parker kept booking the dates. Elvis kept showing up. Not every flight carried that heaviness. There were stretches where Elvis emerged refreshed, settled into the main cabin, and talked about movies he wanted to make or songs he intended to record, conversations full of forward momentum. He ate simple food on those flights, sandwiches rather than anything elaborate, and the contrast between his genuine preferences and the excess surrounding him always struck Strauss as revealing something true about who Elvis actually was. Those flights reminded him why the professional relationship had become something closer to protective devotion. Other flights moved through a different atmosphere entirely. Elvis would stare through the window for hours with eyes that didn't seem to register the shifting landscape below, the Mississippi Delta giving way to the Rockies opening into Nevada desert. Conversations trailed off before reaching conclusions, thoughts abandoned mid-sentence. The crew developed an unspoken protocol for these stretches: maintain course, minimize disruption, hold the aircraft steady, and give him whatever quiet the altitude could provide. The weather was clear on the day of the final flight home. Strauss conducted his pre-flight inspection with the same methodical attention he brought to every departure. The destination was Memphis International Airport, a route he could have navigated without reference to any chart. Everything about the preparation was routine. Elvis boarded in the early afternoon without ceremony. Strauss noticed something immediately, though he would spend years afterward struggling to name exactly what it was. Elvis wasn't visibly distressed, moved with reasonable steadiness up the stairs. The difference was more like an absence, a quality of removal, as if he were already partly located somewhere other than the aircraft. He settled into a main cabin seat, turned his face toward the window, and stayed there. The engines wound up, the Lisa Marie taxied to the runway, and the takeoff lifted them into the afternoon without incident. In the cabin, Elvis remained at the window, motionless. The usual passengers spoke in low voices when they spoke at all, the cabin carrying a weight of quiet that everyone seemed to feel without anyone naming it. One of the flight attendants mentioned to Strauss during a check-in that Elvis hadn't asked for anything, hadn't moved, just kept watching the world pass below. There was worry in the way she said it, the specific worry of someone who knows a person well enough to read their silences. The Mississippi River came into view during the descent, and Memphis Approach Control granted clearance as it always did. The Lisa Marie dropped altitude smoothly, and the landing was as clean as any Strauss had ever made, the wheels finding the Memphis runway with barely a sensation. The engines spooled down. Silence replaced the engine noise, but this silence felt different, heavier, carrying a chill that Strauss noted without being able to explain. Elvis rose from his seat, made his way to the exit, paused briefly at the top of the stairs, and descended to the tarmac. Strauss watched from the cockpit window as he walked to the waiting car. No wave, no acknowledgement, just a man going home. The car pulled away. Strauss opened his logbook and filled in the data, dates and times and fuel figures. Destination Memphis. He closed the book without any sense that he had just written the final entry in something irreplaceable. 48 hours later, the phone rang. The voice on the other end came in fragments, shaking enough that the words took a moment to assemble into meaning. Elvis had been found unresponsive at Graceland. Emergency crews had worked on him. Nothing had worked. He was 42 years old, and he was gone. Disbelief arrived first. Strauss had seen Elvis 2 days earlier, quiet, tired, but not this. The calls kept arriving, each one confirming what the previous one had said, each adding small details that turned the impossible into something real. Graceland had descended into chaos. Fans were gathering with flowers and grief they didn't know what to do with. Elvis Presley was dead, and the world was responding the way it responds when something fundamental shifts without warning. The crew gathered in the kind of stunned quiet that comes when language fails. Memories surfaced in fragments, the generous Christmas bonuses, the time Elvis had personally thanked them for holding steady through severe turbulence, the way he would sometimes emerge from the back bedroom just to check how everyone was doing. That final flight replayed differently now. The silence, the window, the stillness, all of it looked like something else in retrospect, though Strauss resisted claiming more understanding than he'd actually had in those moments. He had been the pilot. He had done his job. He had brought Elvis home. Graceland opened to the public in the years that followed, drawing millions through the rooms where Elvis had lived and hidden from the world that loved him too loudly. The Lisa Marie became part of the exhibit, permanently grounded, its engines silent for the rest of its existence. The aircraft that had represented movement and escape now stood as a monument to everything it had once offered relief from. Strauss kept his silence through the immediate years after Elvis's death, declining reporters who came looking for insider accounts, feeling that what the cockpit had witnessed belonged to a category of privacy that public curiosity didn't override. But decades passed, the misinformation multiplied, and people who had barely known Elvis sold stories that traded in sensation rather than truth. A different kind of responsibility began forming. When Strauss finally spoke, his account carried none of the drama that the celebrity death industry would have preferred. He described Elvis as genuinely kind, genuinely troubled, worn down by pressures that would have broken most people long before they finished him. He spoke about the final flight with precision rather than embellishment, the good weather, the clean landing, the silence in the cabin, the figure at the window who seemed to be watching the world below with the attention of someone preparing to leave it. Just the memory of a quiet man at a window, watching America pass below at 30,000 feet, looking out at something that remained beyond reach, no matter how high the aircraft climbed or how fast the engines pushed it forward.